Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down Noche UFC 306, which goes down this weekend, the first ever MMA and UFC event at the Sphere, the brand new Sphere in Las Vegas. And the Sphere looks absolutely insane. Like, from the outside, it just looks amazing. I can't wait to see what it looks like on the inside. The UFC have dropped some hints as well that maybe from a production value they're doing something a little bit differently, or at least they said something along the lines of they're making the most of what the Sphere has got to offer. So I am intrigued to see if there's going to be something different in regards to that production value, because I've said it for years. You get the likes of KSW that have done it for years. I've been to numerous KSW events around Europe. Then you get Octagon as well, which Octagon in Europe, you know, these shows production values are just absolutely off the scale. So even though KSW and Octagon are not a UFC or a PFL, man, like, they're putting on shows like no other promotion in the world. So I am intrigued to see if the UFC are going to do something spectacular, if there's some, you know, allowance in the Sphere to do something different to what we've seen before. So I am looking forward to it. And on top of that, even though there's only 10 bouts for this card, I'm really looking forward to this card as well. I think top to bottom, the fights are really well matched. There's some real big names. There's going to be some great fights. I think all in all on Saturday, we're in for a real special event, and I'm really looking forward to it. But before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you go to MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler there. So whether you're somebody that just likes the long shot parlays, you know, a bit of a fun gambler. Last week, for example, we had in the create your own parlay section, we had 15 potential betting options, and 12 out of those 15 options won. We had 3 pre-made parlays for you as well. 2 out of those 3 parlays won. So even the fun gamblers section, you know, it's always going to be trickier to win a parlay than it is a straight bet. But even in the fun gamblers section, you are getting something there. And last week, again, will have been profitable for those guys. But of course, if you're a long-term gambler and you're just wanting some betting advice to maybe help your own bets, then we have written breakdowns, full written breakdowns for recommended bets. And then if you're someone that just wants to follow exactly what I'm betting on as the professional handicapper, then you can follow those official bets where we tell you exactly where my money is going. And then of course, in the same subscription package as that, you are also getting the Bayes AI predictions from our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight on every UFC card. And like I say, that's all in one subscription. We don't separate the subscriptions. You just have to choose how long you want your subscription for, whether it's one event, monthly or annually, and that's all at MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, let's get into breaking the fights down. We've got 2 title fights, and we're starting with the main event, which is the Bantamweight Championship fight between the current champion, Sugar Sean O'Malley, versus Merab Dvalishvili. And this is a really good fight. It's actually quite a binary fight in regards to, you know, sort of where each fighter's going to win the fight, should they win. So obviously if Sean O'Malley defends his title and wins the fight, then that's more likely to have been a striking heavy performance. But if the fight is won and lost from a pressure wrestling perspective, then it's obviously going to go to Dvalishvili. So it's a really good fight stylistically, and it's going to be really interesting to see how both of these fighters approach the fight. Because look, from my perspective with Merab's somebody that's been a bit of a cash cow for me since he came into the UFC. I've nearly always bet Merab. There's been a couple of fights where I haven't bet him, but most of his fights in the UFC, even at chalk, so even having to pay, you know, north of minus 200, and then even the plus 200 that I got against him that I got on him against Petr Yan, you know, when every man and his dog were on Petr Yan to beat Merab. I've bet Dvalishvili a lot in the UFC. I've won every single bet that I've bet on him in the UFC. So it's one of these fights that I was really intrigued. It's pretty much, well, it was pretty much a pick 'em. Sean O'Malley started to get a bit of money behind him, and I kind of get it. So with Dvalishvili, it's one of them where, like I say, I've been on him for many years throughout the UFC, and for those that have followed me and listened to the podcast for a number of years, even before MMA Play 365, you're probably tuning in to see and to hear why I'm picking Merab to beat Sean O'Malley and become the champion. Because again, I've said that Dvalishvili is a fighter that's going to be at the top of the division and is probably going to touch UFC gold at some point. However, I'm just not sure about this matchup. I didn't think that Dvalishvili would be in a title fight against this opponent. I was a little bit unsure of what opponent it was going to be, but I certainly didn't think it was going to be Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley, has improved, is developed, he's becoming a UFC superstar, and I'm really struggling with Dvalishvili, not just because of that, but because of the shift in how fights are being scored. And look, when it comes to Dvalishvili, it's very unlikely, and especially against Sean O'Malley here, that he's going to get a finish with it being a knockout or submission. I really don't think he finishes Sean O'Malley, and I'm sure most, fight fans, hardcore fans, people that break fights down as well are going to be saying the same thing. So for me, it's going to have to be a 5-round decision for Dvalishvili to win this fight, and this is what I mean by the difficulty because of the change in or the shifting in the patterns and the ways that the judges are scoring these fights, because Merab is going to be one of these fighters that is going to pressure wrestle. He's going to try and slow the fight down, stall against the cage a little bit, and look to take O'Malley down. And the thing is with O'Malley, like I say, his takedown defense is improving, his get-up game's improving. Like even Aljamain Sterling in his last fight, Sean O'Malley beat Sterling to win the belt. And Sterling, in my opinion, maybe he's not the better relentless wrestler than Dvalishvili, but Sterling for me is absolutely the better grappler. Like if Sterling could have got Sean O'Malley down, I think Sterling would have caused some legitimate real problems. Like if he took his back, I don't think that O'Malley would have got straight back up to his feet. But with Dvalishvili, the issue that he's got is, sure, he can score 10, 15 takedowns in a single fight, but because he's not doing anything on top of his opponents in regards to topside grappling and the jiu-jitsu, when his opponents are getting right back up to the feet, which if he's scoring 10 takedowns in a 3-round fight, the reason there's 10 takedowns there is because the opponent keeps getting back up. And yes, eventually the amount of takedowns that he's scoring, the judges are going to have to be looking at. But when I say there's been a shift in how the judges are scoring fights, if Dvalishvili is scoring takedowns but not doing anything topside, and then in between those takedowns happening, Sean O'Malley's landing good strikes, he's a sniper, and he's piecing Merab up a little bit before the next takedown comes, the judges are going to score that more highly than Merab actually scoring, or accumulating a lot of takedowns throughout the fight. So that's what I see happening. I don't think that Dvalishvili is going to spend a significant amount of time on top of Sean O'Malley, and then in the open space, when there is the moments of breaking play for Dvalishvili, for a lack of a better phrase, Sean O'Malley's going to be landing good shots. He's a sniper, and I just feel that the judges are going to weigh that way heavily than what they're going to weigh what Dvalishvili is doing, which is shooting takedowns, O'Malley defending, then he's taken down a little bit, then he's stood back up straight away, and Dvalishvili hasn't done anything with the takedown. And I think there's going to be a lot of clinch control time in this fight where Dvalishvili is on the legs of O'Malley, maybe trying to chain from a single to a double, maybe trying to sneak around the back, but not really doing too much with it. And then maybe there is a quick takedown, then O'Malley gets right back up to his feet, and then there's a break, and then the strike. And again, I think that's going to be the theme of the fight. And if that's the case, that cage control time, I think, is just going to be viewed by the judges as a bit of a stalling tactic, or not a stalling tactic, but an area in the fight where Dvalishvili is controlling but not really doing too much with it. Whereas on the in the center of the cage, when they're out in space, I think O'Malley's going to be doing some good work with the strikes. And the other thing as well is Dvalishvili posted this cut a couple of weeks ago, above his eye. It wasn't a horrific cut, but a significant one that I did think needed stitches. But if that's the case, that eye is not going to be healed either. So if O'Malley's targeting that, maybe cuts the eye open, then I think O'Malley's got an opportunity to maybe win by doctor stoppage. The finishing upside is absolutely with O'Malley as well. if there's going to be a knockout, I don't think he'll submit Merab, but if there's a finish, I think it'll be a knockout, and that'll be on the side of Sean O'Malley. And then, like I say, if the fight goes to a decision and Merab just hasn't done enough with, this grinding style and trying to, rinse and repeat takedowns versus the striking O'Malley, the nice striking of O'Malley, there's crowds going to be behind O'Malley. Every time he lands, I think there's going to be a big roar. So I do think that Dvalishvili might potentially struggle on a decision as well. I just think it's a good fight for Sean O'Malley. It's UFC superstar. He's a fighter that's improving rapidly, and the UFC more often than not get what they want when it comes to, these title fights and who they want to market. And I think that's definitely O'Malley as well. So with everything, brought together, I do think it's a tough fight for Dvalishvili. I won't be surprised if he wins because he has, he's a world-class fighter and he has got a relentless wrestling game, but I just feel like it's Sean O'Malley's time at the minute, and I just, I'm not sure how long he's going to be the champion, but I think this is a good fight for him, let Dvalishvili try and win the fight by not doing too much and then O'Malley landing the good shots in between those moments, and I think that's ultimately what's going to get him the win, whether it's a knockout or a decision. So for those reasons, I'm picking Sean O'Malley to win this fight and still the UFC bantamweight champion. And in the next fight in the co-main event, we've got another title fight. This time we're with the Women's UFC Flyweight Championship. We've got a trilogy fight as well. It's Alexa Grasso versus Valentina Shevchenko 3. So that's right, these ladies, this is the third time that they are fighting. The first time, so look, I've got some thoughts on this fight, and obviously I've got some thoughts on this fight and breaking it down, but yeah, I've got some strong opinions on this fight, and I'm going to start with the first fight and then into the second fight. So the thing, because what I think is really important here is the progression of Alexa Grasso. I feel like she's got better with every not just every fight that she's fought Shevchenko, because it makes it sound like she's fought her 10 times, but with the moments, with the minutes, with the rounds, I feel like every round Grasso just seems to be getting Shevchenko a little bit more. Like in the first fight, I thought that Shevchenko was winning the fight, Grasso looked a little bit out of her depth, but then Grasso somehow latched onto a mistake from Shevchenko. It was the spin attack, and Grasso took the back during the spin, took her down, choked her out, and it was not only an upset from a betting perspective, but with how the fight was playing out as well. So then Grasso fights Shevchenko again in the second fight, and Shevchenko, even though she lost, is a favourite, and you can understand why, because it seemed that she had Grasso's number, and she was beating Grasso until that mistake. So you're thinking, well, it was somewhat close in the first fight, but Shevchenko to me was edging clearly the rounds. And in that second fight, I'm thinking, well, if Shevchenko doesn't make that mistake she made last time in the heat of the moment, then she probably, cruises to a decision win here without too many issues, too many problems. But Grasso came into that fight way more improved than the last fight. And she even dropped Shevchenko in that second fight as well. She was looking better. The fight was close and competitive. Like, Grasso wasn't running away with it, but it was close. It was competitive. We're in round 5 and we're thinking, well, this might be the round that decides it. I think a lot of people had that fight 2-2 going into round 5. I know I did. Some people obviously scored the fight to Shevchenko, and that's fine. It is one of those close fights that could have swung either way. But for me, I had it 2-2 going into round 5, which in contrast to that first fight, completely different. Grasso was in this fight. She was competitive. She'd leveled up. She's now matching Shevchenko each minute, each round. And then, of course, after round 5, we got the scorecards and it was a draw, which left Grasso still the champion because, the contender, you have to beat the champion to actually win the belt. If it's a draw, it stays with the champion. And I actually disagree with that decision. I disagree with a couple of things as well, actually, because it's really interesting. One judge scored that last round for Alexa Grasso a 10-8 round, which in my opinion was absolutely no way a 10-8 round. She won the round 10-9. She did a bit of damage at the end, or quite a bit of damage at the end, but it wasn't a 10-8 round. But that's actually the single score from a scorecard that made the fight a draw. If that judge had scored that round 5 10-9 to Grasso, which in my opinion it should have been, Shevchenko would have won the fight on a split decision. But it wasn't because of that 10-8. It was a draw. Now, I think both of those are wrong. I think that the 10-8 is wrong. It shouldn't have been a 10-8. But I also don't think Shevchenko should have won the fight either. So maybe it was the right outcome considering. But I did think that it was 2-2 going into round 5. I thought Grasso won round 5 and should have won the fight. Now, this is what I mean about progressively getting better. Because now she's fighting Shevchenko again. And I think we're going to see a better version of Alexa Grasso once again. In that second fight, Grasso started southpaw, I believe, or she was switching stances between the southpaw and the orthodox stance to match the stance of Shevchenko. And she was boxing really, really well from the southpaw stance as well as, the conventional stance. So I think Grasso's really, really leveling up as a fighter. And, the fact that she dropped Shevchenko in that second fight doesn't surprise me because of how much better that she looked. And then when you look at where Shevchenko's had advantages in both fights, it's within the wrestling. So she has proved in both fights that she's the significantly better wrestler. She scored 8 takedowns across both fights, 4 in each, and I think she's going to get takedowns in this fight as well. But the reason that Shevchenko's not pulling away here is because Grasso's jiu-jitsu is actually really underrated. Her get-up game's really good. Even though Shevchenko has proved that she's the better wrestler over both fights, and I think she'll still be the better wrestler in this fight on Saturday night, what Alexa Grasso has shown is that if Shevchenko takes her down, guess what? She can get back up to her feet. So it's not as much of a concern with Grasso's side now if she is taken down, because before you're thinking, well, if she's taken down, does she get back up? Well, now we know that she can. And then when you keep the fight striking, you would automatically assume that Shevchenko's probably going to have the advantages. But this boxing style that Grasso's got just seems to be a little bit of kryptonite for Valentina Shevchenko's kickboxing and a Muay Thai. She just doesn't seem to be able to deal with that pressure boxing, and Grasso's not landing too many kicks, and Shevchenko's trying to get the kicks at range, but Grasso's in boxing range, and then it's making it difficult, and Grasso's the better boxer. It's just Shevchenko's the better kicker. I just think that Grasso's got Shevchenko's number here. And then additionally, Shevchenko lost a belt. Then she tried to win a belt back and it was a draw. So, from a rematch perspective, not many fights. I think it's something like 70% of fights, of rematches, are won by the fighter that won the first fight. And especially when it becomes a title fight as well, it makes it a little bit trickier. It just feels that Shevchenko lost a belt. She had a chance to win it back and she wasn't quite there and looked worse than what she did in the first fight, where she actually lost a belt in that first fight. And then now she's in this third fight. She is aging a little bit as well at 36 years old, so I just feel that there's a lot of upside with Grasso. I think she's developing, continually getting better, and especially getting better in this specific matchup as well against this specific opponent. So for those reasons, I'm picking Alexa Grasso to win this fight and still the women's UFC flyweight champion. And in the next fight, I love this fight. I'm so glad the UFC have rebooked it. It should have happened a couple of months ago. We've got Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes. So, like I say, this fight should have happened a few months ago. And Ortega, I think it was on the actual night of the fight, had to pull out. He had a rough weight cut. You could see it was a rough weight cut. He missed weight, I believe. Lopes still accepted the fight. He didn't care. But then Ortega did have some medical issues, and I think it was medical issues, if I remember rightly, but I'm sure he pulled out on fight night and the fight didn't go ahead. And then, of course, it was that famous Dan Ige stepping in against Diego Lopes on less than 24 hours notice. Dan Ige had to weigh in at the actual event before the fight. So it was crazy. It was a crazy turn of events. Lopes still got a fight against Dan Ige, though, and to be fair, absolutely smashed him. And this is where, if you're following these breakdowns and you've listened to this podcast and you listened to the breakdown of the previous fight, I actually picked Brian Ortega to win. And I actually had a bet on Brian Ortega at like plus 125 or plus 130 before that fight was cancelled as well. And I'll be honest, it's one of them where I wasn't too disappointed in that fight being cancelled because Ortega looked horrible on the scales. I know he's looked bad before, but this seemed a little bit different. And it turned out that he didn't fully recover from that. So I'm kind of glad that bet was pulled. If that fight had gone on, I think Lopes would have won. And I'm actually changing my prediction and my pick here because there's just something about Lopes. Look, Lopes was a little bit of a cash cow for me early in his UFC career. And I say early in his UFC career, he's not even been fighting for the UFC that long. But, I've cashed Lopes, a number of times at plus money, at a pick him, when everybody and every man and the dog are on the other side. Lopes was somebody that really stood out to me early on. And yes, I did go against him when he was booked for his last fight against Ortega, but seeing how Lopes performed against Dan Ige just proved to me that Lopes, can fight at that pace, at that level for 3 rounds. Dan Ige's up there at the top of the division with some of the best. Like, I'm not saying he's as good as Brian Ortega, but he's damn close. And Ige's got a good ground game, legitimate BJJ black belt, wrestles with extreme couture as well. So again, very wrestling heavy gym, and he's got that one punch knockout power. So Lopes dealt with all that, and I know Dan Ige was on short notice as well, but listen, Dan Ige's a guy that's going to be in the gym every single day, whether he's got a fight lined up or not, and he's not going to be one of those fighters that half-asses it when he hasn't got a fight. He's a professional. He'll go in there and he'll be training hard with his teammates that are in camps as well. Like, he'll be in camp with his teammates. So yeah, like I say, I know it was short notice, but I still think Dan Ige, it wasn't a totally reduced version of him, but Lopes handled it comfortably. And I just feel that, I'm kind of getting that feeling that Lopes, this is his time against Ortega. I think Ortega is going to provide, some difficult moments. Like, if this is the Ortega we got last time out against Yair Rodriguez, or the Ortega that we got against the Korean Zombie, then he's absolutely going to cause problems for Lopes. But the pace and the power of the strikes from Lopes, I think, is going to cause Ortega a real issue. And even if Ortega takes Lopes down, yes, I think that he's going to have some success on top of Lopes, but Lopes' jiu-jitsu is good enough to either attack from bottom or get back up. It's just if Ortega is wrestling heavy, maybe he can squeak a couple of rounds. It's one of these fights where I do think that the betting line should be much closer. Like, I think that, Lopes probably, if he was like -125, -130, maybe I get that a bit more. Up at -180, I'm not too sure. But I do think it's a fight that he probably is going to win. Like I say, the pace, the pressure, the power that he's got in his hands, and he's got the jiu-jitsu behind him to keep him safe if he's taken down, where other opponents who fight Ortega don't have that level of jiu-jitsu. So with everything together, and again, the weigh-in, like, is Ortega going to struggle at the weigh-in again? Is he going to have another rough cut? Is he going to come in a little bit depleted inside the cage? I'm pretty confident Diego Lopes isn't. I'm not so confident that Ortega is. So yeah, it's one of them that, like I say, I don't like switching picks with a rematch, especially when the fight never even happened. But I do think that Lopes is probably going to... I was really impressed with what he did against Dan Ige. Like, that really opened my eyes to exactly where Lopes' level is at, and I think he's going to do enough here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Diego Lopes to win this fight. And in the next fight, this could be a really fun fight between two explosive strikers. We've got Daniel Zellhuber versus Esteban Ribovics. And like I say, it should be a fight that's won and lost on the feet. Daniel Zellhuber, a tall, long, rangy striker that will utilise kicks along with his boxing. And then you've got Esteban Ribovics on the other side that, he's got some kicks himself. We saw that last time out with Terence McKinney, but Ribovics has got power in his hands and will box more than he kickboxes, whereas Zellhuber is probably more of a kickboxer. I'm just not completely sold on Esteban Ribovics. I haven't really been sold on him since he came into the UFC. And listen, that's not me saying that he's a bad fighter. What I mean by sold on is I'm struggling to really find out see where his ceiling is at and where he fits within the division, because I do think, well, obviously there's winnable fights for him in the UFC. Like, he's 100% a UFC caliber fighter. I'm just not sold on him progressing maybe into the rankings, where, if you fast forward 5 years and we see Daniel Zellhuber in the rankings, I'd not be surprised at that. I think Zellhuber has had a rough start in the UFC, but is a fighter that's come back stronger, that's developing, that's looking better each fight. And I think that, for as young as what he is, he's got a really bright future in regards to potentially hitting the rankings. I just don't see that from Esteban Ribovics, and I think it's going to be one of these fights where, look, if Zellhuber hits the top 15 in a few years' time, and we're looking back at that run to get him into the rankings. I think it's going to be one of these fights where we look back and think, yeah, we understand why Zellhuber won that fight. It was probably just a bad matchup for Ribovics, who caught Zellhuber at the wrong time, with Zellhuber on the rise, but not kind of proved it yet, if that makes sense. So I think what's going to happen in this fight is, look, Ribovics was probably going to try and start kicking from the outside. I think he's going to like those kicks after what happened last time out. But I think if he's playing a kicking game with Zellhuber wins that battle on the outside, with him being a little bit longer as well, long leg reach. I don't think Ribovics is going to have much success with his kicks in this fight. I think Ribovics has got to get into boxing range. And in boxing range, you can have success, and he's got power. But the thing is with Zellhuber's also a really calm and steady boxer as well, with good straight punches, good fundamentals. And I just don't think he's going to hang in the pocket and exchange wildly with Ribovics. And I kind of feel that's the fight that Ribovics needs to win. And I don't think Zellhuber's going to give it to him. I think Zellhuber's going to be the slightly sharper striker here, better technically. Then he's got the differences in the range as well, so he's going to be good from the outside, okay on the inside as well. And yeah, I just think that Ribovics will have his moments. Maybe he'll have an opportunity to land clean on Zellhuber, but I do expect Zellhuber to be the slightly better striker here. Better focus, better sharpness, and that should allow him to win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Daniel Zellhuber to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Luis Ronaldo Rodriguez, Lazy Boy, versus Ode Osbourne. And Ronaldo Rodriguez is a fighter that I really like. I think that he's super entertaining. He's a guy that will eat some big shots. We saw that last time out against Bondar. And he's a fighter that can mix things up as well. Like, he doesn't always go for his wrestling, but he can definitely grapple. He put Bondar in some horrible positions. He swept Bondar as well. I think he's a tricky grappler with a really good striking game, hard leg kicks, good combinations, forward pressure, aggression. You've seen he can eat shots, so he's going to be happy eating punches if it means he can break into his opponent's boxing range and rip to the body, rip to the head, and look to try and knock them out. Against Ode Osbourne, Ode Osbourne's going to have advantages here as well from a physicality perspective, especially with the reach. He's got a big reach advantage. He's got a height advantage. And that's going to be the first problem for Ronaldo Rodriguez here, especially that reach. He's got to get into range. And Ode Osbourne is a decent mover as well. He's quite quick. He's got a big cage to work in as well. So I do think Ode Osbourne is going to be able to implement some of his game here, but I also think Ronaldo Rodriguez is going to get into range and be able to rip as well. So I think it's going to be one of these fights that is competitive. I think both fighters are going to have the moments. Both fighters are going to be able to have the moments in the ranges where they need to fight in, and they're both going to have a relative amount of success. So I do think it's going to be competitive. Now, from an odds perspective, I do think that the odds were quite wide, a couple of days ago, about 48 hours ago, from recording this podcast. Ronaldo Rodriguez was like minus 170, but money's coming on Ode Osbourne within the last 48 hours, and now Ronaldo Rodriguez is sitting at around minus 125, minus 130 at most bookies. I think those odds are closer to the real odds of where this fight should be. So what I'm saying there is, I do think Ronaldo Rodriguez is the rightful favourite in this fight. I just think he was too big of a favourite a couple of days ago. Now the line's sitting on where I believe it should be. Again, I think it's going to be a close and competitive fight, which the betting lines as of right now currently suggest. But I just think that Ode Osbourne has had issues against fighters like Ronaldo Rodriguez that can get past that range into his boxing range and then causing problems, because the boxing range is absolutely where Ode Osbourne doesn't want to be, and we have seen Ode Osbourne knocked out in this range before. I think that Ronaldo Rodriguez might crack him as well. Whether he knocks him out or not, maybe he does, I'm not sure, but I do think that Ronaldo Rodriguez routinely gets into that boxing range to land good shots, to the point of if he doesn't knock him out, he's probably winning the round. So I could absolutely see a 29-28 here where Ode Osbourne's had a clear round, Rodriguez has had a clear round, and then there's one round that is quite close, but Rodriguez just edges. So it's that type of fight for me. I'm picking Ronaldo Rodriguez to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Irene Aldana versus Norma Dumont. Now, this is another fight that I think is just going to be really close, and I wouldn't be shocked at either fighter winning this fight. Irene Aldana, for me, is going to have the striking advantage with the technical boxing and the volume, and maybe not so much the pressure. Look, Norma Dumont likes to pressure her opponents as well, but I think if Dumont's rushing forwards too much, I think she's a little bit hittable within the straight punches, within the boxing, and that's where Aldana seems to shine, within the boxing and the straight punches, exactly what I've just said. So I do think that Dumont's going to be hittable here. I think that Aldana is going to have a moment's striking with Dumont, but it's just whether Dumont decides to wrestle or not, because this has always been a little bit of an Achilles heel for Irene Aldana. She's always been that good striker, and she's not terrible when it comes to the wrestling and grappling. Like, she's got skills there. But when she's fighting somebody that can wrestle and grapple, that seems to be where she has the most struggles in mixed martial arts and in her fights. And I think Norma Dumont has got that ability to wrestle and grapple. I just don't know how much I trust Dumont to actually go there, because we've seen in some fights where she's needed to wrestle and grapple to win because she's not been the better striker, and she has done and won. But then we've seen in other fights where she needs to wrestle and grapple because she's not the better striker, she hasn't done and lost. So I think that there's an inconsistency there of when Dumont decides to wrestle and grapple in specific fights. If she comes in heavily wrestling and grappling in this fight, she's probably going to win, although I do still think it's going to be close even if she does. But I just can't trust it. So I am leaning towards the side of Aldana, who I know is going to be looking to, to strike, to box. She's sharp with the striking as well. And I just think she's the better, she is, in my opinion, the better striker. It's just Dumont can make this fight very close and potentially nick it from Aldana if she decides to wrestle and grapple. And I just don't have that faith in Dumont to come into this fight and relentlessly do that, even though she's got the cardio and the ability to do it. So yeah, if Dumont does, then she could potentially win the fight, but I'm not sold on it. So for those reasons, I'm picking Irene Aldana to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one of the fights I'm looking forward to most on the card. We've got Manuel Torres versus Ignacio Bahamondes. Now, from a physicality perspective and a little bit from a style perspective as well, it's very similar to what we have with Daniel Zellhuber and Esteban Ribovics, which I've already broken down. So you've got Ignacio Bahamondes, that's predominantly a striker, more of a kickboxing heavy striker, and you've got Manuel Torres, who's also predominantly a striker, but he's more of a boxer. With Torres, though, he does have a submission game. So even though he's a good boxer and he's got insane power that we've seen multiple times in the UFC, he's actually got 6 submission wins against 6 KO wins. So his KO and submission wins are actually identical, which you wouldn't automatically assume if you watch the majority of his fights in where he's striking, because he's a good striker. But we did see it last time out against Chris Duncan. His wrestling was decent defensively. He got took down, but he was able to get takedowns on Duncan as well after getting back up to his feet. And then he submitted Chris Duncan, and I think that was a real solid win, and it's going to open the eyes and get the attention of a lot of his opponents, because his opponents might have been thinking before that fight, well, if we can weather a little bit of storm from Torres and take him down, we've probably got him there. But now Torres has shown that, because look, Duncan's not a bad wrestler at all, and he's a decent grappler as well as a good striker. So with Manuel Torres actually defending the takedowns from Duncan, then getting takedowns himself and standing back up when he was taken down, and then getting a submission, it's going to catch the attention of a lot of fighters. Now, Bahamondes doesn't have a bad takedown game either. He's mixed it in a little bit, but I just don't think after watching Duncan against Torres, I just don't think Bahamondes, even if he goes for takedowns here, I don't think he's going to be able to get them, or at least not easily. Whereas if Torres decides to take Bahamondes down, I could absolutely see that being a possibility. Bahamondes has been taken down before. Ludovic Klein, did a really good job of taking him down and controlling topside. I think Torres can replicate that. But the real worrying thing for Bahamondes in this fight, in my opinion, is that when his opponent crashes the distance and gets inside to that boxing range, his abilities suddenly just fly out the window. He's not that great defensively when he's fighting a specific style, and that's the pressure, aggressive boxer. He can leave his chin up in the air. He can be cracked. We've seen him dropped. And I just think Torres has got this real insane power, and he's going to get inside of Bahamondes. If he doesn't, I think Bahamondes picks him apart completely from the outside. Bahamondes' kicks are really, really good, high level, and I think he pieces Torres up on the outside. But it's because of that I don't think Torres is going to stay on the outside and just allow himself to be pieced up. I think he's going to get into range. And to be fair, both fighters actually really like to crash the pocket. And when they're crashing the pocket and exchanging hard punches in that boxing range, for me, there's only one winner. I think Manuel Torres lands hard shots on him, probably drops him a couple of times, maybe knocks him out. It's just, like I say, if Bahamondes does use the big cage and his movement's really good, I think he's going to be the slightly faster fighter as well. So with the speed and the movement, if Bahamondes can just strike from the outside, a little bit like a Wonder Boy type of fight where he's getting in and out of range quickly, but then striking a lot on the outside, moving laterally, not letting Torres close the distance, frustrating Torres a little bit in the process, I think that's where Bahamondes can really get at him. But like I say, I do think that both fighters are going to crash the pocket. I do think they're going to exchange in boxing range, and I do think that Torres is going to crack Bahamondes, quite regularly. And whether he knocks him out, I'm not sure, but I think the hard shots are going to come from Torres. I think a bit of hesitation might start creeping in on the Bahamondes side, and I think Torres does take this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Manuel Torres to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Yazmin Jauregui versus Ketlen Souza. And I think that this fight could be close and competitive in some moments, but I do expect Jauregui to be the better fighter here. I think with Ketlen Souza, she's one of these fighters where we're still yet to, and I don't think even this fight's gonna solve what I'm about to say, but we're still yet to really see exactly how good she is, because she fought Karine Silva in her first fight in the UFC, and Karine Silva's an absolute beast and, will beat a lot of fighters in this division, and she lost that fight. Then not only does she get a step down in competition, because obviously she can't step up from Silva, and if she does, it'd be mental, because like I say, Karine Silva's a good fighter, but she takes too big of a step down in competition, in my opinion. She fights Marnik Man, who, again, I think that was a horrific fight for Marnik Man fighting Ketlen Souza. Ketlen Souza beats her relatively comfortably. So we're still like, well, you fought a fighter that, there's no shame in losing against, but then in the next fight you fought a fighter who you definitely shouldn't be losing against. So we're wanting to see the mid-range between a Marnik Man and a Karine Silva, and I just don't think Jauregui is that. I think Jauregui is really high level. She's got really good boxing, good pace, good speed. She has got great volume, will rip combinations. She's got a good takedown defense game to keep the fight standing, but she's actually got a decent grappling game as well for the moments that we have seen her grappling. So I think that Jauregui is, a Karine Silva type of fight for Ketlen Souza again. In fact, that's actually a fight I probably wouldn't mind watching, a Jauregui versus Karine Silva. I think that would be a really good fight to match. But I think both Jauregui and Silva are on a similar level. And again, it's not that in-between fight that I'd have liked to have seen for Ketlen Souza. I think Ketlen Souza's going to struggle in this fight. I think she's at a disadvantage from a striking perspective. So then she's going to have to go to a wrestling and grappling. And she's one of these fighters that isn't a specialist anywhere. She's just okay decent everywhere. And I just don't think the wrestling and grappling is going to be good enough for someone like her to take Jauregui down and control her. I think if Jauregui is going to get taken down and controlled, it's going to have to be by a fighter that is a specialist within the wrestling and grappling. So I think it's a good fight for Jauregui. I do understand why she's a big favourite in this fight, and I do expect her to get the job done. So for those reasons, I'm picking Yazmin Jauregui to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Edgar Chairez versus Joshua Van stepping in on short notice. So the fight should have been Chairez versus Kevin Borjas. Borjas pulled out. Now, when I taped that fight, that original Chairez and Borjas fight, Borjas, so I said Borjas, I meant Borjas. So Borjas was like a plus 130 underdog in that fight against Chairez, who was like minus 175 in some spots, and I thought that was crazy. So when I actually watched the fight, I was completely expecting to be all over Borjas. I bet Borjas against Joshua Van when they fought on Borjas' UFC debut. I bet Borjas against Alessandro Costa as well. So the two fights that I have lost, you're not going to win every fight, and I'm always transparent, and I'll talk about the wins, and I'll also talk about the losses. But in fairness, I got Borjas at like plus 200 against Josh Van, and then I got him at plus money, I think, against Alessandro Costa as well. So, or at least very close. It might have been pick-up money. So it's not as if I'm betting chalk. I'm just trying to get an edge with, with the tight odds, with the short odds. So look, anyway, I watched Chairez versus Borjas, completely expecting to bet Borjas again as the underdog. But for me, I kind of feel like Chairez gets a little bit I wouldn't say disrespected, but he's absolutely underrated. I think he's much better than people give him credit for. And I think it was that Daniel Da Silva fight, where Da Silva was a massive underdog and everyone was, so confident in him winning. I thought Lacerda was going to win that fight as well. I think I bet him the first fight when it was a no contest due to the referee stopping the fight, thinking that Lacerda was unconscious and then actually wasn't. And then I didn't rebet him in the next fight because it just worried me a little bit, the fact that if the referee hadn't have stepped into that first fight to stop the fight by submission, thinking that Lacerda was unconscious, I actually think Chairez would have put him unconscious. So I didn't bet him the second time, but I think because of that sort of, those fights that were trying to be made between those two, I think in between that, Chairez was getting really underrated and a little bit disrespected at the same time, and he's better than that. And when I watched him against Borjas, it put me off betting Borjas completely. Like, it wasn't even going to be a bet. And obviously that's one of the good things about actually watching tape. But with Joshua Van, I think Chairez is going to give him a fight, but I think Van is just better. Like, you look at Van against Borjas, yeah, Van got dropped in round 1, and after then, he just absolutely tore Borjas apart. And I know that Van lost last time out to Charles Johnson, but I think that's one of those fights where Van just had to lose that fight. He had to lose that fight to maybe come back with some improvements. He's still super young. He's so young, and I think that loss to Charles Johnson is going to be one of the best things that happens to Van's career, because he's going to learn so much from that fight. He had great moments in the fight. He could have potentially been winning on some scorecards. It was super close, super competitive. Charles Johnson's a difficult fighter to fight anyway. And then Van did end up getting beat late in the fight. So honestly, I think that loss is something that Van's going to look back on and learn so much from, to the point where he's going to come back in this fight and look so much better. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think Chairez is going to have his moments early, because Van does start slow. He starts slow in pretty much every fight. It's something that he has to improve on, because going forward, once you start fighting the top of the division, you're going to start losing that round 1 and putting yourself in a tricky situation in the fight. But I do think he starts slow again here, because that's what the trend's telling me. I think Chairez starts really fast, but Chairez he slows down. He's I wouldn't say his cardio falls off a cliff, but his activity levels fall off the cliff. He slows down the longer the fights go on, to the point where, there's a lot of moments in fights where he's just looking for openings and opportunities rather than trying to strike and find those opportunities. And because of that, he's falling behind on the activity levels, and his opponents start building into the fight. And I think Van is going to absolutely rip Chairez late in this fight. I think Chairez is going to start the round 1 well, start the fight well, and Van's just going to grow into it and just absolutely put on a clinic the longer the fight goes on. So for those reasons, I'm picking Joshua Van to win this fight. And the final fight to break down on the entire card, we're starting with the young talent, Raul Rosas Jr. versus Aoriqileng. And I think Aoriqileng's got a horrific matchup for him here with Raul Rosas Jr. Again, Rosas Jr. I think lost to Christian Rodriguez at the right time. Just like I said with Van, there's some losses in MMA, and GSP, George St. Pierre, spoke about it when he lost to Matt Hughes. That was the best thing that happened to George St. Pierre, according to him, because he learned so much from that loss, to the point where it allowed him to thrive and become the fighter that he became, which is one of the best fighters that's ever walked planet Earth. And I think with Raul Rosas Jr., just like I said with Joshua Van, that loss against Christian Rodriguez was the right time for him to lose, so he can learn from it. And I think Aoriqileng, like I say, is in for a really tough fight here. Raul Rosas Jr. is relentless with his wrestling. He's got a sick topside grappling game. It's this new era MMA grappling game, which is just serving him so well. But he's also got knockout power in his hands as well. So not only has he got knockout power, he's got an absolutely relentless wrestling game, a sick grappling game. He's got pace, he's got pressure, he's got submissions to go along with his knockout finishing ability as well. He's just a really, really good fighter. The only real question mark we've still probably all got on him is, can he wrestle hard against another wrestler and grappler for 3 rounds? Because that's where he failed against Christian Rodriguez. We've not seen that really tested yet. I mean, I don't think we're going to see it tested again here, because Aoriqileng won't have that same scrambling and grappling ability as what Christian Rodriguez had. Where Aoriqileng's good is within the striking, being dangerous. He's got power in his hands, so that's something Rosas has got to watch out for. But honestly, I actually don't think Rosas strikes much with Aoriqileng here before he level changes and takes him down. And once he feels that he's got an advantage on the mat with Aoriqileng and he can keep him there, I think if he doesn't finish him, he just keeps going back to the well each round, taking him down, doing good work on top. So I think that Aoriqileng probably is in one of these fights where I actually don't think that Aoriqileng can or will be able to get his game going because of the offensive wrestling from Rosas Jr. And then the longer this fight goes on, the more hesitant Aoriqileng is going to become to strike. It's going to break him mentally a little bit as well, because he's going to get frustrated and he's not going to be able to get his strikes going like what he needs to, and it's just going to make Rosas grow into the fight even more. So I think it's a bad fight for Aoriqileng, and I'm picking Raul Rosas Jr. to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. If you're on one of the podcast platforms, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, please feel free to jump over to YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really helps us. Drop a comment on the YouTube video as well if, we disagree on any picks, or if, you're betting something different, or if you want to list your bets or talk about a specific fight. I do try and make the time every week to get back to the comments. It is me that gets back to the comments, so I will always try and reply and have that conversation with you. So please feel free to come over to YouTube where we can communicate a little bit. And aside from that, one last time, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend, make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler: long-term gambler, gamblers that just want to follow my official bets, fun gamblers, so the make your own parlays, the pre-built parlays. We've got everything for every type of gambler, and of course our UFC prediction software from Base AI is also included in every single package as well. That's all on at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.